Good evening. Hello. Good to see you. My name is R.J. Heyman. I'm the rector here at Holy Trinity Episcopal Church. I know a lot of you, but I don't know all of you. So just first of all, I want to say welcome. It is a joy to have you in our midst. What can I say about Dave Zahl? I've known him now for about 20 years. We met through this amazing youth ministry called Focus. We were both kind of post-college leaders. We became fast friends, and then he went on to found this amazing ministry called Mockingbird, which started as a blog, and now that blog, remember blogs? Remember what those are? You know, kind of ongoing social commentary type stuff. That blog has about 50,000 readers every month. Mockingbird Ministries now has a number of different podcasts, and those podcasts have over 50,000 listeners per month. He's written 3 different books, the latest of which is called Seculosity, which interestingly both got a 5-star review in Christianity Today, and was also called Remarkable by The Guardian, UK. And how many books do we know of that can say both those things? So he's managed to speak about faith, but really about life, about humanity, in a compelling way for people not just who are Christian, not just who are churched, but people who are not. I'll also say if there's one thing that Dave Zahl loves more than Jesus, it's rock and roll. And that is not a joke. He knows literally everything about rock and roll music. And so if you think that you are a 20th century pop music sort of aficionado, talk to Dave and you shall soon be humbled. He loves rock and roll. So he's, as I said, I think in my personal opinion, he is one of the most insightful, smartest, most humble, most interesting commentators on sort of contemporary American culture. And so I'm just overjoyed to have him speaking today. For those of you who are joining us via the magic of YouTube, lovely to have you as well. Dave's going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then if you have questions at the end, I'll come around with a microphone, and we'll do a little bit of a Q&A. But without further ado, the author of Seculosity, David Zahl. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, RJ. Am I being amplified sufficiently? Can you hear me back there? Thank you, RJ. It's really an honor and a joy to be here. He's not lying. For once, he's telling you the truth. Just kidding. RJ and I have been close friends for a long time, and we get to record one of those podcasts he gets to join me on, which is really such a privilege and an honor, because it means I get to keep up actually with what's going on here at Holy Trinity in West Palm Beach. So to be here for a place that I've thought about and heard about and prayed for, and then also to get to preach tomorrow, it's really It's exciting. It's exciting. It's also exciting to be anywhere, you know, in 2022. I think there weren't a lot of speaking engagements the last couple of years. So I'm here to talk to you about God's grace in an age of seculosity. God's grace in an age of seculosity. They're going to throw out a bunch of neologisms, or AKA made-up words. So if you think, oh, did he just say something that I've never heard before? It's because I made up a bunch of words. So bear with me. I'll try to define them. Seculosity. It's a big, it's a risk to title your book after a word that doesn't exist. But I figured it was worth a shot. And actually, thanks to my mother who's sitting right there, she encouraged me to go for it. But if you're going to do that with a title, then the subtitle has to be really, really long, they told me. So the subtitle is How... What is the subtitle? It's been a while. How career, parenting, technology, politics, and food became our new religion, and what to do about it. Did I get it? Romance is in there too. So you know what? I just work here. It's a book that hopefully covers a lot of bases, but again, it is an attempt to formulate an answer to the question of why is it that we as a people, as Americans, as Christians in the West, whatever you want to say, whatever metric you're going for, whatever demographic you're looking at, the data suggests, even pre-COVID, that we are as anxious as we've ever been, as lonely as we've ever been, and as divided as we've ever been. Those are the three, in my work with Mockingbird over the first 10 or so years, I kept coming up against article after article. College students are more anxious than they've ever been. Young mothers, more lonelier than they've ever been. Recent retirees are more anxious than they've ever been. And so it's trying to figure out why is that? Is there any kind of line through that we can uncover? And for me as a Christian, is there any kind of resources we can bring to bear to hopefully understand, and not only just understand, but maybe marshal some hope? As just a basic statistic, in the last decade, anxiety finally overtook depression as the most common reason that college students seek counseling services. The number of college students, and I just think that's a good barometer of where things are. Between 2009 and 2019, the number of students on some form of medication for anxiety or depression doubled in America. That's a big increase. So the number of undergrads reporting overwhelming anxiety went from 50% in 2011 to 62% in 2016 to 76% in 2018. So, I don't know, add COVID in, now I guess add a war. There's a lot of reasons to be concerned, a lot of things to keep us up at night. So why is this happening? Well, I think that people in Palm Beach have a little bit of an edge on those of us in the sort of northern states, because here you can walk around without shoes on, right? And you get some looks in some places. I was walking around without shoes earlier here, and I did get a few looks, but it was all from the rector. I was reading some article saying that the reason people are more anxious is because they're not grounding their ions enough. And you ground your ions when you walk around barefoot. So this is true, but I don't think it's really the reason why we as a society are, footwear I don't think has to do with the real reasons why we are so agitated. I think what you hear from a more and more shared consensus, even on all sides of the aisle, is that we've lost a sense of meaning and metaphysics, something to share, some sort of shared value system that we could lean on to give our lives some kind of shape. And without that, what you have is everyone needing to make up things for themselves, which can be very exhausting. If you've gone to a wedding recently that wasn't in a church, you know that the bride and groom sometimes have had to construct an entire, philosophical worldview from scratch. And that's a lot. Some of us, you can roll your eyes, you can congratulate the person, but whatever you do, you can look at that and say, well, that's a tall order. I'm so glad I had those words put in front of me because I was so nervous on that day, I didn't know what I thought, right? Well, I think as a Christian, I hear more and more that the reason that we are so unsettled, unhappy, is because we're less religious than we used to be. You read polls about declining belief in God. You read polls about declining church attendance, certainly in mainline churches like this. So, my answer is not that we are less religious than we used to be, but that we're too religious about too many things. That's what seculosity is trying to get across. The problem that most of us deal with today is not a loss of religion, but a kind of supercharged religion is everywhere. Now, what do I mean by that? Seculosity, by the way, to define it, it's simply a word designed to capture religious energy or devotion that is directed at earthly rather than heavenly targets. So if you've been to the grocery store recently, and I was in Publix, we don't have Publix in Virginia. We just got Wegmans, which is a good thing. Do you have Wegmans here? No? Okay. Well, it's coming. It's a great spot. But and I couldn't help but notice when I was being marketed to from the second I came in about foods that were more directly sourced than other foods. There was a sense of which these are the pure foods, and these are kind of the fake foods, right? I saw a lot of people looking at, this is, by the way, if you go into Whole Foods, you're going to get a lot more of this. I'm a Trader Joe's man myself. But there's a lot of marketing about purity. There's a lot of sense if I eat something that's pure, well then my body will be purified. I will be righteous, maybe morally. I will be seen as ethically concerned. But something about what goes into my body will produce something good that sort of moves forward in the world. This is, I think, a very religious idea. When you're talking about food purity, you're in the realm of halal and kosher, and you're in the realm of these sorts of things. People don't like to think that organic, inorganic has that meaning, but just go to a child's birthday party in 2022 in Charlottesville, Virginia, because you're going to get a lot of lectures about what is proper and right for kids to eat and what the bad people eat, all right? Which is all what kids want. So then you'd go to the gym, and you'd hear lectures almost as part of the gym class that you would be taking part in. You'd stand up, you'd kneel down, you'd hear about how you can really do it if you try harder, and you all start aphorisms about the purpose of life start to seep in. And I would leave these classes and I'd think, gosh, I felt like I was in church or something, especially when we passed the peace there at the end. It's a little strange, but it was more expensive. Seculosity maintains that these are just minor hints at what's really going on, in that the marketplace for replacement religion is booming. If you want to sell someone something, yesterday, my wife and I have been saving up for a Vitamix blender. Do you have a Vitamix blender? You know these blenders? They make the best smoothies in the world. It's insane. There was the NutriBullet and the Ninja, and now there's the Vitamix blender. Now, when I got the Vitamix blender, it came with a card in it. You know what it said? It said, "Welcome to the Vitamix family." I thought to myself, family? I didn't know I was joining a family. I thought I was getting a blender. People are so lonely, and people are dying for belonging, that the Vitamix people know this, and they want you to join their family. It's a common, and then the next day, my wife got some skincare products, some nature skincare products from Essential Care Co. or something like that, and the first line was, "Welcome to the Essential Co. family." And I thought to myself, we already got a family. I don't want to know about this family. One is enough. Just kidding, with all due respect to my parents. So what's being marketed to me is belonging. That's a form of meaning. That is a form of acceptance. That is what churches oftentimes, we say, we welcome you into our church family. Well, now you don't just have to join the Holy Trinity family. You can join the Peloton family as well, okay? So I don't think that people are actually abandoning faith and making their own meaning. What I think is that the marketplace, again, in replacement religion is booming, that we're seldom not in church from a certain perspective. Now, I realize that depends deeply on how you define the word religion and how you define the word secular. What does it mean to be religious? Or what does it mean? Let's talk about being secular first. Secular in the Middle Ages was the idea that there was sacred professions and there were secular professions. A sacred profession was what the monks did. They were praying for you. That's what the priests did. They had a sacred work. A secular or a profane type of work was sort of that which proceeded on the earthly plane. Merchants were secular as opposed to sacred. But that is, after the Enlightenment, secular came to mean a-religious. It became to mean sort of objective. Public schools are secular as opposed to parochial. Today, usually when someone says they're a secular person, it means they're not religious. The way that Charles Taylor, who's the philosopher, the Canadian philosopher whose work undergirds a lot of this book, he has a book called A Secular Age. And it's like a doorstop of a book. No one reads it. And I only read the parts of it that I felt applied. But he says that a secular is actually, we live in a secular age not because there are no religious people, but because religion is one option. Belief in God is one option among many. We cannot presume that the person you meet on the street is a Christian. In other words, in 1200, if you said, you would have to explain yourself if you weren't going to church, or if you said you didn't believe in God. The onus of the burden of proof was on you. Today, it's the other way around, is it not? It's sort of, if you are a churchgoer, you're sort of, that demarcates you as you're not just anyone. Well, that's how I would define secular. That's how I'm using it in this term, in this phrase, because it doesn't mean, one of the things the way they misinterpret this book is that it's a comment on everyone else who's not a Christian. But in fact, you can belong to a religious body like this, and you can still be religious about your politics. You can still be religious about your parenting. You can still be religious about romance and refer to the person you're dating as your soulmate. Soul mate. Those are religious terms. Well, mate isn't. Does anyone here like to drink LaCroix? LaCroix? 1, 2, and a bunch of people that aren't telling the truth. Everyone seems to drink LaCroix where I am, or now it's knockoffs, right? LaCroix. Have you ever read what's on the bottom of a LaCroix can? I wish I had one here to show you. You know what it says? I find it's like they handed me such an incredible illustration of seculosity. It says 0 calories plus 0 sweeteners plus 0 sodium equals healthy? No. What does it say? Innocent. You're innocent. If you're in the realm of innocence and guilt, you're not actually in what is usually thought of as nutrition. Okay? Nutrition, we talk about health. We talk about things that are good for your body. We talk about perhaps heart disease. We don't talk about guilt and innocence are jurisprudence terms. You are understood to be innocent by you get absolved somehow of the bad, maybe the alcohol you had last night or the burger you just ate. If you have one of these cans, you remain innocent. You're not getting any more guilty, right? I mean, what do we say when we break our diet? What do we say? I feel guilty. I was bad. I had a brownie. Oh, I'm being good today. I'm only going to have salad, right? These are much stronger terms, and they're actually religious terms. And I think it's kind of deceptive, but also brilliant the way that they've been imported into our life. So one of the writers that I like, who is not quoted in the book, but she is a person who comments on this stuff from a more secular perspective. Her name's Megan O'Geeblin, and she was writing in the Paris Review a few years ago, and she summed it up. She said, as more and more Americans leave behind religious belief, instead of becoming purely rational agents, we increasingly displace those religious enthusiasms onto other things. We increasingly displace those religious enthusiasms onto other things. So senses of heretics and true believers, orthodoxy, has become, if you are a person who is raising children right now, or you have your children are raising children, you know that the pressure to raise your child in this way as opposed to that way is very, very strong. And if, like, I remember being so caught up by being at a couple of playgrounds where folks would, if they saw you parenting your child in a way that they disagreed with, they would come up to you and correct you in a way. And I thought, where do I know this from? I know this from youth group, from when people would drink too much and the other guy at the party would say, hey, don't you know that you're a Christian and you're not supposed to be doing that? Right? That kind of behavioral policing felt to me religious, but not in a very good way. So what does it mean? I mean when I talk about religion? Well, if you're going with the common conception of religion, what I would call capital R religion of robes and kneeling and God Almighty, then yes, there is increasing amounts of ambivalence about that expression, and these institutions are in need of repair, and I think that places like Holy Trinity are what give many of us hope for that sort of repair. But the landscape shifts if you opt for a more expansive view of religion, what I would call small r religion. So not big R religion is Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, etc. One writer I like named David Dark, who wrote a book called Life's Too Short to Pretend You're Not Religious. It's kind of a provocative title. He calls your religion is simply your controlling story, the controlling story of your life. It's the question of how you dispose your energy, how you see fit to organize your own life, and in many cases, the lives of others. So let's call that small r religion. If that's the case, then your religion is what you lean on to tell you you're okay, that your life matters. It's another name for the ladders that we spend our lives climbing towards a dream of wholeness. One of my favorite definitions of small r religion is it's your preferred guilt management system. We all walk around and we either have things we feel guilty about on a large scale, maybe something that happened with one of our family members a long time ago, or we feel an acute sense of guilt just from stepping on the toes of the people we live around or them stepping on our toes. How do you deal? What do you do with that? Do you bring that to the gym? Do you punish yourself by depriving yourself of some sort of pleasure? Do you take that guilt and try to make someone else feel terrible and project it onto them? When we talk about a call-out culture, sometimes that's what that means. It's like, look at that person, how terrible they are. So, AKA, don't look at me. I don't know what it is for you. We all have these things, I think, that are small r religions. In fact, I'd go further than just saying it's the guilt management system. In theological language, your small r religion is the justifying story of your life. The justifying story of your life. To translate that back into modern parlance, it's that which you rely on not just for meaning or hope, but for enoughness. Enoughness. Another made-up word. Your religion, therefore, is whatever road you're taking in what T.S. Eliot calls the endless struggle to think well of ourselves. I remember the New York Times ran an article about just precisely this sort of anxiety and self-harm among high school students. And the person who they talked to at Cornell, Gregory Ells, who runs their counseling services, he said that for many of these young people, the biggest single stressor is that they, quote, never get to the point where they can say, I've done enough, and now I can stop. There's always one more activity, one more AP class, one more thing to do in order to get into a top college. Kids have a sense that they're not measuring up, the pressure is relentless, and it's getting worse. Let's take this word enough, though, because it's not just young people. It's not just high school students. If you listen carefully, you'll hear that word enough everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, especially when it comes to these big three, the anxiety, the exhaustion, and the division, or the loneliness and the division that plague our moment to such tragic proportions. You'll hear about people scrambling to be successful enough, happy enough, thin enough, wealthy enough, influential, that's the big one right now, to be enough of an influence or have enough followers, to be desired enough, charitable enough, good enough. Could it be that we believe instinctually that were we to reach some benchmark of enoughness, then value and vindication and love would be ours, that if we got enough, we would be enough? Therefore, it's no surprise, I think, that we want to feel like we're enough, and so we edit our personalities to maximize the approval of other people. This is what makes social media so effective, isn't it? You can leave out the things that you don't want other people to see, and you can highlight the things that you do. Or you can exaggerate the hardships that have befallen you in your life to make yourself seem more heroic or other people more villainous. The theological term for the energy we expend for the sake of feeling enough is self-justification. Self-justification. If you've been listening to RJ preach for 2 years, you've probably heard this concept, because it's all over the Bible. The idea that people want, need, are desperate to be justified, to be seen as enough, righteous, lovable, worthy, valuable, whatever sort of word you want to insert there. So it cannot be overstated, the desire to be enough, the desire to self-justify in human affairs. It cannot be overstated, especially among those we would call religious. Now, you might notice I didn't say anything about worship, right? A lot of times we think of religion as that which you worship. But is the parent who is making sure their child does every single extracurricular and makes sure every one of their friends knows about the extracurriculars their kids are doing, are they worshiping their child? Or are they worshiping the sense of enoughness they derive from other people thinking that they've done a good job? Right? I think that's what's going on. Remember the admission gate thing that happened a few years ago before COVID, where all those kids were getting crew scholarships and things like that? I mean, it was sad. But it spoke to a desperate need for your child to be an arbiter of your own enoughness as a parent, I think. The sticker on the back of the Volkswagen, Your kid's not around for that to bask onto them. It basks onto you as the parent. Well, I don't need to tell you that no matter how close we get or how much we achieve, we never quite arrive at enough. Almost every wisdom tradition lays this plain, and Christianity makes it very clear that there is no one righteous. No, not even one. Our lives attest that the threshold of enoughness does not exist. How many followers are enough, Miss Kardashian? Just a few more, to paraphrase John Rockefeller. Our lives, people as one, there was a British journalist named Will Storr, who I like a lot, who wrote a book called Selfie. And he said this, he said, today people are suffering and dying under the torture of the fantasy self they're failing to become. I'll say that again. People are suffering and dying under the torture of the fantasy self they're failing to become. If this were a PowerPoint presentation, I'd show you a cartoon of a bunch of people on a city street, and they're all thinking the exact same thing. Everyone else seems to have it together, and I still have no idea what I'm doing. But everyone feels that way, don't we? Sometimes I think the process of growing older is just realizing just how little you know, right? So, okay, back to cultural criticism. Why is it that we seem more fixated on righteousness than any time in recent history? Well, I'd say at the risk of gross oversimplification, for centuries we relied on capital R religion to tell us we're okay. Clergy, they were your local forgiveness person. They were the person, RJ was the one who had to forgive you when your wife wouldn't, or had to tell you God forgave you. There was a place to go to unload that shame, to unload that guilt. We could just take that burden off our shoulders like, Christian and Pilgrim's Progress, and just lay it on RJ and let him deal with it. For more and more people, that doesn't feel like a safe option. Now, the funny thing is like Friedrich Nietzsche was right about a lot of things, but one thing he was wrong about was he thought that once religion started to wane, people would feel less guilty, we would sort of emerge into a time of harmony and peace and a gloriously liberated mode of human existence, because there'd be no church making us feel bad for not being perfect. And has that happened? Not at all. Instead, what seems to have happened is we're still carrying around the same burden of imperfection and shame and sin and just dysfunction, but we don't know where to go with it. We have nowhere to go with it. So we blame those people over there, or we put it all on top of our elected official, or we make it so that the picture of us online is some sort of false view, some facade that is deeply dissonant with our actual life. Our current cultural climate tells us that the needs addressed by religion, capital R religion, for hope, for purpose, for connection, for enoughness, haven't diminished as churches have become tap rooms and theaters. That psychic energy hasn't evaporated. It has to go somewhere. And with altars off the table, fresh targets have cropped up all over the place, from the kitchen to the gym to the computer screen to the bedroom. Righteousness is running amok. This is what Charles Taylor actually said. He said that the further we get from a shared metaphysical value system, the more religious options would appear. So today you have the religion of parenting, you have the religion of romance, the religion of success, the religion of food, the religion of personal authenticity. You have gaming church. You have the cult of Peloton. You have the religion of workism. Audible, maybe you know Audible. You listen to audiobooks. I love audiobooks. It's kept me alive the last couple of years. But you know, they purchased a new building as their headquarters. You know what they called it? An innovation cathedral. An innovation cathedral. It's not hidden. None of this is fresh to me. It's right on the surface of how we're living. Where once we chose between an array of different schools to attend, now there's the one that will ensure our future success and the many that will squander it. Where once there was a nice sea of people to date and get to know, now there's Mr. or Mrs. Right, and everyone else is just a waste of your time. Now, when am I going to get to the hope here? Well, you'll notice that these new religions, they go by different names, but they all function more or less the same. They cast a vision of enoughness and then implore you or me to realize that vision with forbearance and grit and currency for the sake of existential reward. If you eat well enough, love well enough, parent well enough, stay busy enough, you will be enough. In this way, these seculosities, they maintain all the demand and a lot of the ritual of capital R religion, but almost none of the mercy, almost none of the forgiveness, none of the absolution. It's exhausting, to put it mildly. I think that's sort of summed up in one of my favorite mock headlines from the last couple of years about a local woman hospitalized after attempting an effortless lifestyle. Indeed, if you talk to a lot of younger women, or mothers and things like that, they'd say there's not just that you have to have a great career and a beautiful house and a wonderful family. You have to appear like you're having those things without any effort. That's a very high bar. It's basically too high of a bar. It creates, the word today is burnout. You know this word, right? A friend of mine named John Malasich just wrote this book called The End of Burnout, and it's a beautiful book. I recommend it to anyone who's interested in this phenomenon. But everyone in our culture right now feels burned out, partly by COVID, partly by life, partly by cell phones. I don't know what it is, but burnout is a big, big deal, and it's not just people in their 50s. It's like 25-year-olds who haven't been in the workforce for very long at all. Okay, so I want to make sure you know that the objects of our seculosity, the things I've talked about, food, romance, education, children, technology, they're not somehow bad. Quite the opposite. They're by and large great. It's only when we lean on these things for our enoughness, when we co-opt them for our self-justification, or make them into arbiters of salvation itself that they turn toxic. I'll give you an example, and then I'll sort of talk about how the Christian gospel maybe stands in contradistinction here. Do you have many chopped salad spots in West Palm Beach? Do you? Is there one on every corner? Like Charlottesville, we used to have other kinds of restaurants. Now it's just chopped salad and Mediterranean grain bowls, right? Maybe you still have like burger joints. We just have these places that sort of get everything into a big bowl. And why are they so attractive? Why do you think? Well, oftentimes they're healthy. But writing in the New Yorker a couple years ago, I think this is true. Gia Tolentino said that eating lunch at a fast casual chopped salad chain feels less like a place to eat and more like a refueling station. The chopped salad is engineered to free one's hands and eyes from the task of consuming nutrients so that precious attention can be directed toward a small screen that you're holding, where it's more urgently needed so it can consume the data, work email or Amazon's infinite catalog or Facebook's infinite feed. We like the chopped salad because you don't have to pay attention to the bites you're taking. You can shovel. I'm into it. I like it. I shovel. But that says that basically productivity has been elevated to a virtue that is nowhere to be seen in the Bible. Productivity is just not a biblical virtue. It's not a terrible thing. It's not 7 deadly sins. But when your diet is completely tailored around maximizing your time, well, then you've fallen into what, Dickensian orphans used to live through. We just pay $14.99 for the bowl, and there's some quinoa in there. So this is the cult of busyness, I think. I think there's a cult of busyness. What's the great thing? When you used to ask people how they're doing, they would say fine or well, and today it's much more often busy. I'm really busy right now. And we are all busy. Life is sped up. Even if you're in retirement, life is full. There's a lot of things to do. But I think busyness remains attractive in an age of seculosity because it does double duty. It allows you to feel like you're advancing on the ladder that you're climbing while also distracting you from less pleasant realities like doubt and uncertainty and death. So when we move rapid fire from task to task, we minimize the mental space for painful feelings while accruing extra points in the enoughness column. Now I use that word points very intentionally, because the language of seculosity is the language of scorekeeping, or what I would refer to as performancism. Performancism. There was a wonderful sitcom that came out a few years ago. It's off the air now, but has anyone watched The Good Place? Yeah? The Good Place was about people in the afterlife. And it stars Kristen Bell, who's Anna in the Frozen movies. She's very delightful, but she plays kind of a reprehensible layabout who gets to the good place after she dies and is very confused because she did nothing good in her life. And on the first day of life in the good place, Ted Danson comes out as sort of the guy who's the head of, and he says, you're in the good place because simply put, you were good people. During your life, you did good things. And every time you thought that someone wasn't watching, when you either helped the older person across the street or you went into the breakdown lane in order to go through traffic, you thought no one was watching. Well, guess what? We were watching. And for every good thing you did, you got good points. And for every bad things you did, you got negative points. And you get good points for staying loyal to the Cleveland Browns. Or it's a whole running joke. But if you stop genocide, for example, you get plus 3 million points. If you use Facebook as a verb, you lose 6 points or something like that. It's very funny. But the language of seculosity is all scorekeeping related. And this is a very instinctual language to human beings. They don't even need to explain that that's how it works. Good people get good stuff, bad people get bad stuff. That is what you would call a version of the afterlife as governed by the law. If you do right, you will get rewarded. There's no grace in that show. There's no grace. Well, there's some grace, but you have to watch the show to find out. What does this have to do with busyness? Well, think about the last time you got a Christmas letter. You know, even if you're not a social media person, maybe you still get Christmas letters or you still write them. There was a researcher I quote in the book named Ann Burnett who spent like 20 years looking at the last 50 years of American Christmas letters. I mean, God bless her, right? I mean, today life is one long Christmas letter called social media. Her findings are predictable. Among the 5 decades worth of letters in her archive, those from recent years focus far less on giving thanks or forecasting and much more on how jam-packed the preceding months have been. There's a sort of a busier than thou attitude that people have. She cites one particularly vivid example in which a mother writes, I'm not sure whether writing a Christmas letter when I'm working at the speed of light is a good idea, but given the amount of time I have to devote to any single project is the only choice I have. We start every day at 4:45 a.m., launch ourselves through the day at breakneck speed, only to land in a crumpled heap at 8:30 p.m., wondering how we made it through the day. Now, letters like that are only written in an environment in which people are competing for social rewards over busyness, right? Busyness has become a status symbol. What does it mean about you if you're not busy, for example? You're nothing good. But not that you're enlightened or you're Buddha. It usually means that you're, pathetic or something. I don't know. Throughout all of history, think about it in Jane Austen novels. Anyone here love Jane Austen? I love Jane Austen. The people gloried in their idleness, right? Their distance. If you were an upper class person, you were proud of how far away from the harried lower echelons of society who had no choice but to work. And you watch Downton Abbey and the thought of, a career. I don't think I need to go there. Let's not deign to be a career person. I mean, that's a long distance we've traveled. A couple centuries later, after Jane Austen, keeping up with the Joneses means trying to outschedule them. So, a life like this, in the life of seculosity, recasts all of our activities. As wonderful and enriching as they can be, they become they become offerings on the altar of enough. It sounds melodramatic, but I hope that rings a few bells. Because again, what I'm talking about is one of the hallmarks of seculosity, which is performancism. That's the last neologism. Performancism is the assumption, and it's usually unspoken, that there's no distinction between what we do and who we are. Your resume, I work with college students at the University of Virginia, and I'm right now, a lot of them the fourth years are freaking out about, there's 2 of them right there who graduated a while ago, but they're freaking out about their next steps. And they're so worried about the ones who have jobs feel like they're safe and secure, and the ones that don't are absolutely frightened. Because there's an unspoken assumption that's been drilled into them from a very early age that your resume is not part of your identity, it is your identity. What makes you lovable and what makes life worth living is your performance at X, Y, or Z. Performancism holds that if you're not doing enough or doing enough well, you are not enough, certainly less than those who are killing it. So performancism turns life into a competition to be won or a problem to be solved, as opposed to, say, a series of moments to be experienced or an adventure to relish. Performancism invests daily tasks with existential significance and turns even menial activities like drinking a seltzer into a measure of enoughness, into an arbiter of salvation and absolution. The language of performancism, as I said, is the language of scorekeeping, and it knows no mercy. That's not its point. It's like the calendar or the weight scale or the bank balance. It just says it measures. It doesn't proclaim a good or a bad. But when supercharged by technology, the result can be deadly. So religions, small r religions that run according to performancism, tend to be what Christians would call religions of law. If you eat well enough, you will be good enough. If you are wealthy enough, you will be enough. If you have enough followers, you will be enough. If then. Christianity stands, again, in contradistinction to all of these seculosities, in that it is a religion of law and grace, which is to say it's really a religion of grace. It's a because God loves you, therefore you are enough. Because Christ came into the world, therefore your sins are forgiven. It's proclamatory. But I want to talk about this in the Q&A. RJ, what time do I have? Oh, shoot. I'll say 3 things and then we can get to the Q&A because there's a lot of really good news in this book. The book is really trying to make a case for why Christianity, why a message about God's grace for suffering people, for people who don't feel like they're enough, why that would be good news, and why it's not just good news for the people in church, but for everyone. Because those who are not at church on Sundays, you know what they're doing? They're at the gym. They're working out their salvation with sweat and trembling. Or it's something else. At Palm Beach, they're probably just on a boat, right? I don't know. I'll say this, okay. I think the reason to look at this is not an avenue for regret or for despair. It really is for the Bible. Christianity believes that this desire and pursuit of enoughness is at the heart of who you are as a human being, who I am. And in fact, it's also at the heart of God's message to you, that you are justified not by works of the law, but by faith in Christ. That is an active message, not an antiquated one. It's a one that speaks directly to you and me today. I think those of us who are steeped, who care at all about the New Testament and the message and work of Jesus, we're uniquely positioned to address the cry for help that's underneath so much of the anxiety, division, and loneliness that haunts our time. I think that secondly, though, by recognizing that these impulses are everywhere and that none of us are truly free of them, it can only expand the shrinking common ground that's required to live together in a non-miserable way. You're religious just like me. We're in different ways. Let me talk to you about what happens when you fall off the ladder. Let's point to God's grace. I think it also, seculosity reconfigures in a helpful way our anxiety about the diminishing relevance of the church, if you're a person that cares about the church, or Christianity globally, or the context of like grandchildren who don't go to church, or I don't know what it is. Those things are not threatening. They're an opportunity for creativity, compassionate ministry of pointing to God's grace, knowing that they're just as much under the law as you and I are, just as much under that accusation of not enoughness that seems to drive so much of our pain. To put another way, religion is not nearly as weird as Christians sometimes think it is. I think seculosity draws the religious and non-religious together by showing how we're all working with similar impulses. And it highlights the beauty and power of the Christian gospel, of God's grace. But that is what's at the center of what we do in this church. We talk about a God who meets us in our individual and collective not enoughness with a love that knows no bounds, the kind that lays down its life for its enemies. Properly preached, we are not presented with a roadmap for engineering spiritual enoughness. We are brought to the glorious news, the proclamation, that on account of Christ, you and I are enough, right here, right now, before we do or say anything. That is to say, Christianity at its sustaining core is not a religion of good people getting better and failing, but of real people coping with their failure to be good, and the God who loves them anyway. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions? Happy to come around if anyone has any thoughts, questions, comments, anything?
What about you?
I have a question. So you like to work hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too. How do you do that? How do you work hard and care about things and want to sort of, I don't know, put something out there, and not have it slip into, just ego work? Or you either burning out or just this being about pumping up your own ego. How do you stay connected to why you're doing what you do and what the purpose of the work is beyond just this need to fill in the enoughness hole in your own life? Because we have a lot of people who like to work hard too, I think. Yeah, and how do you do that, if it's possible?
I don't know. I think usually a lot of great work is born out of either love for the thing you're doing, as people say, love your job and you'll never work a day in your life, or love for the people you're providing for, or love for the world and the ways that you're able to do interesting things. I think that work is sustaining. Usually there's got to be some element of love there. If it's nothing but proving, if you're successful, you will get enough affirmation to keep going. But if you're not, or even if you are, get enough affirmation, you either won't know who you are when you finally stop working, or you will burn out before then. I think that it's very complicated, the way that the religiosity of work happens, because I was talking to a person in Charlottesville. There's a large company that has attracted a lot of young people that makes apps. They make the Fox Sports app. They make HBO's app. It's a successful app company. And they've just opened up this is pre-COVID, they opened up a new warehouse, repurposed everything, like a kind of a Silicon Valley base in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's extremely cool. Now, they toured that one day, and I was there with one of my friends because I wanted to see it. And you know what the number one question was when people toured this incredible new space? Can I bring my pets? I was like, what? There is no distinction between the office and the home. The office is the home. There's no work-life balance is a outdated concept. There was a sense in which the office had become the hearth. Of course I would need to bring my pet. If this is my be-all, end-all, and there is no real other life outside of this, then my pets need to be accommodated. We want to make it as comfortable as humanly possible. I think that was a very interesting insight into the way that people conceive of work today. So I want to acknowledge that that's part of just especially in the time of COVID, there was a lot of anxiety about people wouldn't work as hard if they were working remotely. And then all of a sudden it became that basically meant you were never stopped working ever. Like, how could I always make sure there's a little green dot next to my name on Slack or whatever it is? Zoom meetings became this theater where people would make sure that they were present and seen and accounted for before muting and doing something else. It's a very interesting scene. So I think that work can't actually fill those needs. It's not a family because you can get fired. You may have a great nurturing boss. You may have a wonderful team that you work with. But ultimately, if there's a conditional or a contingent relationship in which you can lose that position if you just don't come or you don't show up, I don't think it can be an effective arbiter of love. I think if you have right, what are we getting right now? The Great Resignation, right? What does that say to people? It says that work has, I stopped long enough to realize I hate my job, and it's overtaken everything. And I think there's some pushback. I see a little bit of it right now, and I find it very interesting, as which searching for other, life has to have other aspects to it besides just work.
Has anyone seen that new show on Apple Plus called Severance? Anyone seen that? There's only 3 episodes in, but have you seen that?
I've been told I need to watch it.
The premise is that you undergo a surgical procedure whereby when you go to work, you don't remember anything about your personal life, and when you leave work, you remember nothing about your work life. So there's you go in an elevator, and it's like, boom, total separation between work life and personal life, which is kind of an interesting, commentary on where we are, right? The melding of the two.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny, but also morbid. Yes, you got a question? Yeah.
Hi, Dave. First of all, my wife and I are UVA alumni, so when you said that you teach at students at UVA, we had to restrain ourselves from yelling wahoo wah. We also are very involved. We actually live down here, but we're also in Houston, and we're very involved in our church there. And one of the things that we talk a lot about, and this is to your secularism, which I'd be interested in your answer to. I mean, I happen to believe, we do have increasing secularism and declining church attendance and so on, but I don't think that really is indicative of lack of spirituality. If you really look, there's a lot of things we can point to, but if you look in 9/11 and what happened after 9/11, people were searching for answers after, particularly in New York, obviously, and church attendance, skyrocketed around the city. But there's a lot of other examples around that. So I do believe that there's, and even younger people today who tend to not go to church as much, describe themselves as very spiritual. So we know that belief in God or in some higher being, however you want to do that, does exist. And you talk about our busy lives and the things that we're trying to move toward, this enoughness, which I agree with. How does the church answer that? Is the declining church, if you have a society that does still believe in God, largely, or some kind of spirituality, but they're not going to church, is that because there's a busyness that is part of their busy life? It's getting squeezed out? And if so, how does the church then reverse that? Whatever, because it's so important to people's lives, as you said. So how does the church address that? Because that's something we talk a lot about, and I'm not sure we really have derived the answer.
It's a great question. Right now there is a lot of anxiety about churches failing or emptying out. And again, seculosity is trying to give Christians and people of faith confidence that they do have something of value to say. It's a great sadness when church becomes another arena for asserting your enoughness, a spiritual sort of a good enough Christian. Churches like that can usually attract people in the short term, but then they hemorrhage them once people realize, I've already got that in every other area of my life. I think that one of the other things I'm trying to do with the book is give people new language. If I walk up to someone on the street and said, do you struggle with feeling like a righteous God is disapproving of you in your unrighteousness, they would say, what are you talking about? But if I said, do you ever struggle with feeling like you're not enough? They say, oh my gosh, yes. Well, what if not enoughness, it refers to some sort of standard. It may not, get to it, but it serves to some sort of standard of righteousness, that maybe there's a different way of looking at life, like from the point of view from enoughness rather than for it. So I will say this, the churches that I know that preach about people's actual struggles with themselves and their own difficulties, anxieties, pain, loneliness, and are not trying to lecture them about more things they need to be doing, the ones that really are not afraid of the tough stuff, the difficulties of what it means to be a human being, and then are proclaiming God's mercy, absolution, love, forgiveness in the middle of it, almost all of those that I know are doing fine. And they are bringing in new people. Not all of them. There is a heavy distractibility that these phones bring us. Young families are enormously overburdened with things, and so sometimes Sunday morning is the only family time they get. So they're not going to really sacrifice it for right now, but they might come back later. People grow up a lot later today than they used to. Like a lot later. All of these factors, and then you have people that are watching online. The work we do with Mockingbird has, unfortunately, I say this, I mean, I'm grateful personally, but unfortunately, it's had a big upswing in interest over the pandemic because people like to engage piecemeal the way they do with everything else in their lives, meaning from a distance in a way that they can curate. And if you're online, that'll never replace in-person worship. But I do know that you're right to say that the interests and the needs are just as pronounced as they've ever been. And if we were bold enough to really, I think, proclaim the grace of God for those who are failed to be enough, we will be surprised at what we see.
Dave, on a slightly lighter note, what are your 3 favorite rock and roll bands of the 60s?
3 favorite rock and roll bands of the 60s. The Beach Boys are the top. The second, is the band. And the third is the Beatles. So I don't really leave the B section of the record store. I also really love the early Bee Gees.
Anyone else? Questions? Anyone? Anything? Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. We're going to have a reception in our parish hall. Was in that direction. We've got some wine, some refreshments, and Dave will be signing books as well, and just a chance to meet and converse with them further. Thank you so much for coming. And the last thing I'll say is that we at Holy Trinity, if you have a church, we're not into stealing sheep. But if you don't, this is a really great place. So we'll be back here Sunday at 8 and 10, and next Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, a great opportunity to get in touch with your profound not enoughness and to hear about God's grace. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you in the parish hall.